And this is actually a battle between the Chippewa and the Fox on the Great Lakes, but it gives you an idea of what happened and what's going to go on. Exactly when this event happened, I don't know. I thought when I wrote this book, I'm going to find out the date. And when I get to this time period, everything is very, very foggy. And through deduction, I've kind of narrowed it down as probably happening in 1792. We don't have any contemporary accounts. All the accounts of what the final blow or destruction of the Missouria as an independent tribe mostly comes from later explorers recounting it. William Clark writes about it. James Mackey, the Scottish cartographer who's going up the river in 1795, mentions it. But the best account of what happened came from Maximilian, Prince of Wied, the German prince who wanted to tour Western North America in 1833. And he came up the river and he said, we were at the park called Fox Prairie. Now, on Maximilian's map, he wrote Fox Prairie, and it's the area up in the Great Bend by Saline County. Today we call it the Pettisar or the Teetsaw Plains. They're kind of west of Miami and up by Malta Bend. But he said, we were at the park called Fox Prairie. The Saki and Fox Indians, and perhaps some other nations, formerly attacked and nearly extirpated the tribe of the Missouris. The remainder of the people saved themselves among the Otos, where their descendants still live. The Missouris came down the river in many canoes, and their enemies had concealed themselves in the willow thickets. After the Missouris, who suspected no evil, had been killed or wounded with arrows, the victors leaped into the water and finished their bloody work with clubs and knives. Very few of the Missouris escaped. And that was the end of them as an independent tribe. And I know that about 30 families I found went and joined the Otos who were living at the mouth of the Platte River. About 20 families joined the Little Osage tribe, moved to southern Missouri, and as late as 1825 they were counted separately from their Osage host. And 4 or 5 families moved west to join the Kansa Indians, or the Kaw Indians out west, and an undetermined number joined the Iowas. I found records or indications that there were some Missouris living with them. So that was them as the end of them as an independent nation. But I found all the way from there to today, even though they are living with the host tribes, they still maintain a separate identity. They still have their own separate leaders. They still have their own separate clan structure. As much as they could maintain in their depleted numbers, they just reconstituted as much of their culture as they could, even within their host tribes. And I'm going to run through a portrait gallery of the Nyentuchi real quick. When I started out this project, I had always been told that there were only 2 illustrations of Missouria Indians in existence. And since I did this project, I found about 18 or more. And I'm just going to run through some of them real quick for you here. This is Noch Piwara, the one they are afraid of. His photograph's taken in 1868. This might be the earliest picture of a Missouria in existence, and these were silhouettes made by Charles Wilson Peel in 1806. I know that a large group of Indians, after Lewis and Clark came through, they were sent back to Washington to meet President Jefferson and learn that the Americans were their new fathers and they weren't to deal anymore with the British or the Spanish, but of course they did anyway. And they made these silhouette portraits of a number of the delegates, and we know there were 2 Missourias in the group, and Smithsonian Institution records indicate these might be Missourias, but it said Missouria question mark. They weren't real clear on that. I asked a couple of elders who knew the language to some degree of these names, but they had difficulty translating it. There's been a lot of fluency that's been lost, and then there's a possibility that it is another tribe besides Missouris, but I put it up there because it's possibly the earliest images of Missouria Indians in existence. This one from October of 1819 by Samuel Seymour is Captain Stephen Long and Benjamin O'Fallon meeting the Oto Missourias and Iowa nations at Council Bluffs. Benjamin O'Fallon was William Clark's nephew. And, you know, Clark, after he explored the Missouri in the West, came back and was Missouri's territorial governor and general of the militia and superintendent of Indian affairs. He actually had more power west of the Mississippi than the President of the United States. And his nephew, Benjamin, was appointed Indian agent. And at this council, Benjamin had a reputation for being really harsh with Indians. He didn't like them too well. And he tried to force the complete merger of the Missourias into the Otos by refusing to recognize any chiefs at this council. And that didn't work because I keep finding, like I said, I find records all through the 19th century where the Missouria leaders are still acting on their own. This is another portrait. This is Hashiki Suga, He Who Kills the Osages by George Catlin in 1832, probably painted at Fort Leavenworth. This is probably the second best known portrait of a Missouria. And Catlin wrote when he was at Fort Leavenworth that he thought the Missouris were in the most natural and primitive state of all the Indians that he saw in that area at that time. And one of the elders that I know, I asked him about that name. I said, how about Hashiki Suga? And he said, actually, that translates very well into He Who Kills the Osages. And, but a couple things I could point out to you here on him. He's holding a sacred pipe in his hand, and these pipes made out of catlinite, been around for 3,000 years. You find a lot of them in archaeological sites. It has an image of a bear on it, which might be an indication that he's a member of the Bear Clan. He's wearing grizzly bear claw necklaces, which is tantamount to a war honor, because to earn the right to wear a grizzly bear claw necklace, you had to kill a grizzly bear. Well, what's this tell you? This tells you that at one time grizzly bears were ranging a lot closer to Missouri than they are now. Because there are records of the Indians going out in the plains of Kansas and Nebraska to hunt grizzly bears, and they had to do it the hard way. They had to do it with a lance or a hand weapon. Guns didn't count. So if you found a warrior that was wearing a bear claw necklace, you knew he was one especially tough hombre, and you didn't want to cross his path too well. He's wearing an otter skin turban, and otters are an animal that reflects a lot of wisdom and intelligence, because, you know, otters really don't have many natural enemies, and they can escape danger on land or water. And they're, you know, they're quick, and they're just an interesting animal to watch. And so, again, they wear those things, they use those. That's a symbol of a man with some wisdom, and who has recognized some wisdom and some wit. He probably is a survivor. 1832, he probably was a survivor of the massacre by the Sac and Fox here on the Missouri River. This is a black elk, Humathiwi, his photograph taken in 1868. That's the earliest photograph I could find of a Missouri Indian. And again, he's holding a sacred pipe in his hand. He has the grizzly bear claw necklace. Another variation of the otter skin turban there. This is Opahominy, buck elk walking, and Ian Bricktoe, who's blackbird. This was in 1874. Now you can see a little bit of European influence there, wearing shirts and such, but a turban made out of calico. But Opahominy sitting here, he is a full-blood Missourian. The back of this photograph says that. He has body tattooing on his shoulders and his arms. most people don't realize this, but most of the Indians in the Midwest and even some in the plains did body tattooing, clan symbols, war honors, that type of thing. So this picture is very, very important because it shows a Missouria with that on. His decorations that he's wearing, the beads, he's got 2 gorgets on. It looks just like the same kind of stuff that we find when we excavate anything out of the ground. So basically, he's got his hair shaved in the traditional roach, the scalp lock. We call it a mohawk today, but actually they call it a scalp lock. If you took that Colt Navy revolver out of his hand, he could have posed for a picture in Missouria 100 years earlier, and he looked the same. Their fashions didn't change all that rapidly, and again, you just see a little bit, even though he's got on European dress, he's still adapting it to his needs. Couple more pictures here. Watuka Rashi eats his food raw. Now, the interesting thing about these names is I found that the records are horrific about interpreting the names. Again, a lot of their language, and one of the elders explained it to me, he says, the language doesn't translate well into English because theirs is a picture language. They're painting pictures with their words, you know, and it's a lot more of a concept that they're trying to get across, whereas we're kind of nuts and bolts. Our language is English languages. So a lot of these names, and of course they had no written language, so a lot of these Indian agents and interpreters and army officers, government officials, they couldn't write these names down, so they wrote it down how it sounded to them, and they asked, well, what's the name mean? And they messed them up all the time. It really is a chore to go through these old records and try to figure out who's who. And plus the Indians change their names frequently. If they had a big life event, they could change their name. And so you may look at the same guy in several treaties or government negotiations, and one, he may be called one thing, and then a few years later he's called something else. So it's a real challenge doing genealogy. This fellow is Black Bear. He was raised, it said he was raised mostly among the whites, and he became the leading spirit of the progressive part of the Oto Missouria tribe, and clashed frequently with the traditionalists who didn't want to stop living their traditional lifestyle. This is Thrache, True Eagle, Missouri chief. This one taken of him in 1868. A few years later, in 1874, his age was given at about 80 years, so he may have been born here, or born just shortly after they joined the Oto. Again, he's wearing bear claw necklaces, and in this picture he has an otter turban with a buffalo horn on it. Here he's wearing a calico, basically it's a turban made out of calico. Has on his gorget there, and of course the trade knot.